The amygdala, a pair of almond-shaped structures in the brain that are the origin point of certain instinctual emotions, some being aggression, passion, and fear. You can thank the amygdala for your fear of Resident Evil 2. Maybe you're one of the bold ones, played through this game with a wellspring of reckless gusto. If you were, good for you. Sadly, there were no Lionhearts here. Just endurance and fear, delivered in a very particular melting pot, whose flavor was an enigma. Join us as we talk about the fear in Resident Evil 2, in theory. Boiled down, fear is a reactionary mechanism triggered by an assault on at least one of your five senses. Basically, once the experience is experienced, it can take one of a variety of paths through your brain. Typically, the initiator is the thalamus, which just directs the data to all channels deemed to be appropriate. Next is the sensory cortex, which interprets the data. Then it hits the hippocampus, which determines the context of the experience. It's then routed to the amygdala, which decodes what emotions are necessary for the received experience. This is where fear surfaces. Afterwards, the fight or flight mechanism is enabled by way of the hypothalamus. Once this happens, hormones are released, pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, your body is enhanced to react accordingly. Fight or flight. It's possible to bypass different pathways depending on the experience, but this is what fear does in a nutshell. So what parts of Resident Evil affected us so nightmarishly? That can probably be broken down into three hubs: mechanics, visuals, and sound. When I was setting those settings, part of me considered actually lying to the game and setting it in a way that allowed me to fully illuminate the rooms, but my conscience was a little too illuminated to do that. So I set it the way the game wanted me to. And once I did that, I could see next to nothing when it mattered the most. As a society art, love affair with zombies is almost as undying as them. I think this is because there is a relatability between them and us. The premise behind our average zombie is a resurrected or undying person who, by way of tragedy, becomes a member of the undead. There's an aspect of that that's understandable. Your base zombie it's a person. And we're people. We can empathize with what they were and approximate what kind of person they used to be. And that person likely had a family, friends, loved ones, hobbies, a passion, dreams, aspirations, humanity. I think you get the picture. We share these things because they were us and in some ways are us, but not. They exist in the uncanny valley. And we can thank Masahiro Mori for defining and discovering this term. It's about to be very useful. In a nutshell, Mori was an inventor of robots. People appeared to respond well to their designs and found appeal in their human-like appearances. However, there came a point where the designs were a bit too realistic. Once that point was hit, people felt uneasy and uncomfortable. The thinking here is this: as long as these things are exaggerated and clearly not human, stylized, if you will, with human characteristics, big eyes, small nose, for example, people can accept and find appeal in these creations. However, once something starts to look or feel a little too real, people feel uncomfortable. If its realism is not captured perfectly. Zombies are the embodiment of the uncanny valley. They look like us, but off. Their movements are uncharacteristic. The sounds they make are uncomfortable. Most have stains from various bodily fluids, lifeless skin and eyes. I have a theory that the uncanny valley stretches out to the environment as well. Most of your time is spent in the police station. As you explore it, you get the sense that this was once a bustling place filled with hardworking people. The statue in the center of the lobby is a symbol of what once was. It's white, a color that represents purity, and undamaged in any way despite being in likely the most high-traffic part of the police station. No matter how much pain, death, and chaos unfolded around it, it stood firm, untouched. This is in direct contrast to the police station. Its walls are smeared with blood stains of struggle, flooded hallways, and furniture used as barricades. It creates an unsettling feeling because you're wandering around the halls of what is deemed to be one of the safer places in contemporary society. After all, police stations are where you go for protection, justice, and comfort. But the RPD has turned into a graveyard for those very desires. Hence, the uncanny valley, taking something familiar, pairing it with an unsettling visual imbalance, thus landing the player in a perpetual state of discomfort. I think this is why, for me, the sewer system was less effective for the most part. It was dirty, littered with trash, dark, and hazardous. But it's a sewer. I expect it to feel that way. So when I do, it doesn't bend my reality. It feels appropriate.
Well said. After you.
Gee, thanks.
But outside of a handful of moments, it never felt eerie or off. And the moments where it did capture that feeling were when the principles that were applied to the RPD were applied to it. You can probably guess when those were.
This is getting worse.
The portion of the sewer where you're heading towards the flamethrower, and you see the organs and entrails of Birkin consuming that part of the sewer, is one of the moments I'm talking about. Because it's a place that's familiar, and you have an understanding of what it should and should not be, but then it's encased in this otherworldly thing that you have no understanding of. And now that uncertainty and that fear is creeping back into you, and you're back in the uncanny valley in terms of the environment. Sound can shape an experience in many different ways. It can operate in the background, acting as an enhancement that isn't immediately noticed, but appreciated as a subtle emotional amplifier, silently nudging you into the desired mental state. Or it can operate in the foreground and dominate the experience, forcing you into emotional submission.
Damn it! God damn it!
There are a few sound types that can achieve these goals. We have nonlinear sound, which has the ability to cut through our intellectual capacity, devolving us to our most animal form. Some examples of nonlinear sounds are high-pitched screams, sudden sound bursts or jump scares, eerie or ominous harmonics. Such as the Nightmare Machine, a musical instrument designed specifically for the creation of sinister and unsettling sounds. And certain types of Foley sound, which are interactive sounds, such as claws scratching on ceilings, stumbling, staggered zombie walks, or the sound of a G-monster's body plunging into the water, and so on and so forth. Of the five senses, sound processes the fastest and is the only one defined as a mechanical sense. It's always in full operation and can't be mentally turned on or off. You can't internally decide not to hear something. Our brain has evolved to distinguish the qualities of nonlinear sound as abnormal and indicative of life-threatening situations. Resident Evil 2's soundscape is draped in a sort of threatening foreboding. Even the mundane sounds of jump scares, like hearing a zombie violently slamming its own body into a few wooden boards. Okay, admittedly, that description isn't mundane, but the action itself is. And its sound has a particular sort of booming depth and richness that never stopped being jarring, even when I knew it was coming. There's something feral and empty about it. It's a sound a person can only likely make when all the inhibitors in their muscles are disabled, and they're willing to mindlessly batter themselves just for a chance to consume you. You can almost hear the incurable hunger and desire for flesh the zombies breathing and moaning carry. There was plenty of time where I'd be walking down some decrepit RPD hallway that I knew full well was clear, and I'd hear wood creaking, which I'd appreciate. Then the sounds would stack on top of one another insidiously. Something metallic would sound in the distance. I'd hear the shuddering of wood and the sound of something moving around in the ceiling. Even though I was surrounded by death, the place felt like it was alive, infested. I begin to feel unnerved and consider the possibility that nothing in a police station is never truly cleared. Just out of sight. I still feel as though the worst horrors of that station were never witnessed by Leon or Claire. Those things remained unseen, but heard. As unlucky as they were lucky to avoid that misery. Another more obvious display of sound execution was the stomping of Mr. X.
Better get moving.
It was unnerving and comforting at the same time. I'd find comfort in hearing him because, well, I heard where he was. As long as I had that, I knew I could more or less manage to go unseen. This worked against me in some of the more exposed hallways. I had a particularly difficult time pinpointing where he was in the opening between the West office and item storage room, as well as in the long hallway that followed, which led to one of several safe rooms. I'd get the impression he was coming from every direction at once because of the way the sound traveled when he'd boom through the hallways and burst through the doors. This was also a distraction and left you feeling vulnerable when facing other zombies or lickers. Paying attention to one over the other could lead to imminent death. Turn around and boom! Haymaker. Good night. It made me feel small and neutered. The best plan I could come up with in those situations was to wait until I saw him so that I could effectively chart out an escape route. Even when I got away, I could hear the tyrant's distance stomps. And with every few, there would be a pause. I could practically hear him trying to figure out which way to go in the silence. And in my mind's eye, I saw him doing a familiar looking from left to right motion before determining which way to go. Sound, well, mixed with anxiety-ridden visuals, the combination can be a horrific masterpiece. With mechanics, your fear is contained and maximized. Let's use a real-life example. Let's say you're in a house that's burning down, and a piece of flame-engulfed timber falls down, nearly striking your head, but you're able to dodge at the last second. You have full autonomy of your actions. You can operate three-dimensionally. You can push, dodge, or block things. You dictate your defenses without the need of any type of weapon. Resident Evil is a masterclass in giving you just enough to think you can maintain, not control. It turns inexperienced players into D students. You can defend yourself in close quarters, but only if you have the necessary items. You can't dodge in a traditional sense. You can't kick, you can't punch. Any action you take is item-based. Without items, you're done. Attacks can be escaped for the most part, but not without taking damage or getting one-shotted when dealing with IVs. There's a subtlety in play here that's nearly invisible. You can defend, but you can't defend. You're only as strong as your last weapon. I began to feel worn down by the game, like I was in quicksand and constantly grasping for the surface, occasionally grabbing a branch or gaining some footing, allowing me to offset the inevitable. But eventually something would go wrong somewhere and I would become submerged. At those points, all I could do was hold my breath until I found 5 more minutes of survival, slightly delaying my drowning. And that brings us to the lab. The lab feels sterile and secure. Oddly enough, this sense of comfort and stability was disorienting. Expected was another RPD scenario. More barricades, shattered windows, and dead-bodied zombies. However, this quickly takes a turn after entering the cafeteria. You find all the things you expected to see in the first place, which disorients you again. But to apply another twist, at least for myself, I found comfort in being in an area that reminded me of the dark side of the RPD. The lab, from a societal sense, carries the same purpose as a police department. They exist to bring order to chaos. At this point, both Claire and Leon have become the personification of the meanings these places carry. They exist to bring order to chaos. I say that to say, not much fear was felt at this point. This emotion has been largely conquered. And I think because of this, the lab will always be inferior to the RPD. Unless you're playing with Claire. That's when those plant zombies get real. I'm not sure if the confidence I experienced at this point was due to the game design leading me to that point, or if I arrived there because of my own evolution. Either way, personally, I wasn't finished feeling afraid. I wanted a bit more of that. Curiously, that wasn't the case with everyone I know. The tension and fear being replaced with adrenaline-pumping action was a welcome departure for others. On some level, there's an irony to feeling as though you're at your strongest when you're within the birthplace of all the things that try to stop you from feeling that way in the first place. So, why do we like fear? My theory is that we like fear as long as it's occurring within a contained setting. However, once that setting is violated, then it's no longer enjoyable. It's kind of real, cerebral. We have rules we subconsciously set for ourselves, things something of horror will never do. But once that line is crossed, immersion isn't broken, it begins. Now that thing that scares us will stay with us. We'll take it to work, school, home, to those places we hold dear and sacred as we allow our imaginations to commit these violations. That's what happens when scares break the fourth wall, or rather, we break the fourth wall. You see, breaking the fourth wall is a term birthed in theater. While watching a play, the actors and actresses go about their acting and reacting as though they're not being watched by the audience. If the place they exist in has four walls, then the fourth is invisible, akin to two-way glass. As an audience member, you can see them, but they can't see you. However, once the character acknowledges the presence of the audience, the fourth wall has been broken. To bring that to my current theory, which could very well be wrong. When experiencing horror, for the most part, it's not openly acknowledged that it knows there's an audience present. It continues to exist in its own world. Rather, what I think happens is the horror, whatever that may be to you, crosses paths with something you can connect to in your personal life. Once that happens, you've broken the fourth wall into horror's world. And now you think, on some level, you exist in the same space. And the paranoia experienced afterwards is our amygdala playing into this new reality. Until our hippocampus brings us back to the actual reality, hopefully. In a way, this was fun, a different kind of fun. Fun under duress. A thrill-seeker's reckless fun that came from running through the abyss and turning it into your home. Your Resident Evil 2.